Hi, shalom friends. Let me begin with the story of Beryl. Beryl is a person who comes to the synagogue every single day unless he's out of town or, God forbid, not well. One day, Beryl does not show up to the morning service, what we call the minyan. The rabbi was a good friend and concerned and calls up Beryl and he says, "Beryl, we missed you. Is everything okay?" Beryl says, "Oh, yes, Rabbi, everything's wonderful. If you're wondering why I didn't show up to the minyan today, it's because I had the opportunity to do a tremendous mitzvah. I was on my way to shul, and I saw a fellow Jew, and he was shivering and hungry. And I said, I can't go to the synagogue knowing that there's a fellow Jew who's physically cold and actually hungry. So I basically brought him home, and I made him warm, and I fed him." The rabbi's listening. He says, "Oh, Beryl, what a mitzvah. Boy, you're a lucky guy. You have these mitzvahs come to you." And he hangs up, and he still feels a glow about Beryl, who did this wonderful mitzvah, who took care of a shivering, hungry Jew. Certainly God appreciated that at least as much as a minyan. But the whole day he's thinking, he's living in a nice neighborhood. He's trying to figure out where could he have actually seen this Jew who was hungry. And besides, maybe he could be helpful. So the next day after the minyan, he says, "Beryl, by the way, where did you meet this guy?" He says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, it was my son. You see, my wife was not feeling that well, and she couldn't get up for the baby. So when I woke up to go to the shul, I saw that the baby was wet and shivering. So I changed the baby, I put on a warm outfit, and then I fed the baby." Now I want to ask you a question. Before you heard that it was his baby, would you have considered that to be an act of spirituality, an act of holiness? I think the answer is yes. I think all of us would agree that when you see someone who's shivering and hungry, and you could say your prayers later, maybe that's a pressing need. And if it's a pressing need, it takes priority. But now he's saying, "Oh, it's his own son." Well, if it's his own son, he was just using it as an excuse. So I hope to share with you a thought. I believe it's actually even a novel thought. But before I share it to you, let me present a perspective. Now, this question is not meant to be answered by a Kabbalist or by a mystic or even a great theologian. It's between me and you. We're ordinary people. And if someone were to ask you, can you define the difference between spirituality and physicality? Spiritual or physical? Well, many of us would describe spiritual as non-physical, but that's silly because it's like saying, what is a circle? It's not a square. It doesn't help me. So let me share with you something that probably you will come up with on your own. Physical. Okay, a bagel. A bagel is physical. What's physical about it? It has mass. It takes space. And essentially, it's very, very impermanent because if I eat it, it's gone. Or even if I don't eat it, in 3 days from now, it'll be unedible. In a year from now, it will be non-existent. So physical has mass, physical takes a place, and physical has a time duration, which is often very limited. Spiritual, well, spiritual doesn't really have mass, so if it doesn't have mass, it doesn't take up place. If it doesn't take place, then it's usually not connected to time because time and space are always connected. You say, well, could you give me an example? I say, yeah, sure. Music. A bagel that I eat is gone. Music that's composed can be heard for thousands of years. Not only that, it could be fresh and vibrant and beautiful. In fact, I can even hear it again and again. I can't eat the bagel again and again, but I can certainly hear the same melody again and again. And it's not limited to any time and takes no space. Or how about thought, right? A beautiful idea. It doesn't really take space. The world is not getting filled, so I can't walk or for that matter, my mind is filled with thoughts and there's plenty of room. And I had a thought 100 years ago. I could still read about it today. and so on and so forth. Okay, so we have a working definition of physical and spiritual. Now let's go to another layer of this discussion. What would you do to have a physical experience? And the answer is, what do you mean? I mean, if it's food, I'll go to a restaurant, I'll prepare some food. If it's nice clothing, I'll either buy clothing or borrow clothing, whatever it is. If you want me to have a nice warm bath, I'll fill up the bathtub. That's what I do for a physical experience. What would you do for a spiritual experience? Well, I tell you, I probably would leave my job, because it's the workplace. There's too many distractions of computers and telephones and demands, and frankly, no one's interested in spirituality. They're all interested in making money and pleasing the customer or pleasing the boss. I think I would go for a walk in the park. Actually, even better than that is, if I could take a day off, just be by myself, maybe climbing or perhaps walking, spending it quietly at the beach or at a lake, maybe going on a boat and just being alone. I think that's what I would do. I think that would allow me, open me up, make me receptive to spirituality. And here is where I would like to interject. If spirituality one of the working definitions of spirituality is it doesn't take place, in other words, it has no mass, and essentially cannot be grasped by the hands. So now why do you have to be alone for that? Alone refers to the self. Basically, why do you have to be selfish to experience spirituality? You say, well, why do you call it selfish? I mean, how else can you experience spirituality? So I said, let's go back for a minute. Hearing music in an opera or in a hall, is that going to minimize the beauty of the music? In fact, your experience of hearing the music, the exquisite notes of the melody played by all of these different instruments, isn't it enhanced when you experience it with others? Is it so true that listening to a lecture from a brilliant lecturer with 1,000 other people, would that minimize the thought or enhance the thought? If you consider fragrance something spiritual, well, walking into a scented room, are you going to get any less spiritual enjoyment from the scent because there are 3 other people there? So why do we have this idea that to experience spirituality, you have to be alone? Perhaps to experience spirituality, true spirituality, you actually have to experience it with others. You say, well, with others, doesn't that detract? Doesn't it take away? And here, let me add something. I look at, of course, the Bible, the Chumash, the Talmud, Jewish tradition, as the source of all spirituality. And I'm struck by a remarkable, I would call it an anomaly. The most spiritual of all times is when a Jew would appear before God in the Holy Temple. And you know what God says? Come with a group. Come with a community. The 3 pilgrimages, basically there were hundreds of thousands of pilgrims in the temple. I am sure the streets of Jerusalem were crowded, that the Mishnah has to say no one complained. But it was crowded. They were rubbing shoulders. They were standing back to neck, everyone was there. How could it be that the most intensely spiritual moments of a Jew's life, and that would even include Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, if he was in a holy place called Jerusalem, and on a holy mountain called the Temple Mount, and in a holy house, which is the house of the Lord himself, why not come alone, come off season, come at night? No, the temple was closed at night. You had to experience this with a group. Now, it's true, each one brought their own sacrifice, and yet their offerings were together collectively. Take a look at a Jewish community today. We have morning prayer, afternoon prayer, evening prayer. Ideally, it should be done with a minyan, with other Jews. Look at a wedding. Intensely personal, intensely spiritual. There's a chuppah. No one exists except for the groom and the bride. And yet, you need a minyan. And the celebration is with people. There's no elopement. There's no running away to Vegas and finding a rabbi who will marry them quietly. Look at the birth of a child, male or female. It's not a personal joy. It's very spiritual. God just gave you a human being and you announce it by the Torah. And I could go on and on. Now, I'm not suggesting at all that every spiritual experience has to be experienced with others, otherwise it's not authentic. What I am not only suggesting but advocating, and that is that often the highest level of spirituality is by incorporating someone else in that experience. Now let's go back to the story I told you. Oh, he fed his own child. Is that a spiritual thing? What makes it spiritual? Even animals take care of their young. So I would tell you that actually it's a spiritual experience when you feed your child, not only because he's your child, but because he is a Jewish child or a human child that's in need. If I eat alone, I'm not doing anything necessarily spiritual. If I eat a meal with my wife, I'm having a nice, quiet, intimate dinner. And if I bring a stranger into that meal, I did a mitzvah of hachnasas erchem, of welcoming the guest. And the Talmud tells us, in many ways, welcoming the guest is as holy as having that private time with your wife. Again, I didn't say don't have private time with your wife. I'm merely pointing out that if you're looking for a spiritual experience, a meaningful experience, a soul-to-soul experience, an intimate, it doesn't have to be only with the people that are closest to you. On the contrary, having other people there creates a fusion of spirituality merging with the spiritual, which equals godliness. And that's how I'd like to end this YouTube. Physical or spiritual cannot be narrowly defined as material and non-material. Spiritual, it has to be much deeper. Are you serving God by reaching out beyond yourself, or are you just simply satisfied with yourself? And I'll end off with a rather stark image. Imagine a person who's on a cart, and the cart is being led by two horses. And he's told that he can enjoy the journey as long as the horses are pulling the cart. When the horses stop pulling the cart permanently, that's when his life ends. What would you do? You can't stop the horses. Well, one thing you could do is try to hold back the horses. You could hold on to the reins. I'll tell you another thing you could do. You could make the cart heavier. You could keep on inviting people on the cart. So the horses, instead of galloping, will trot. Instead of trotting, they'll just walk. Why? Because there's a lot to carry. Imagine these two horses, one is called day, one is called night. Life itself. Day and night pull us along. When they stop pulling, that's when we leave this world. Let's make this journey not a tiring one, but an enjoyable one. Let's enjoy the ride. How do we enjoy the ride? Not by artificially trying to lengthen the day. Make the cart heavier. Bring other people into your life. Share your life with others. Share your tradition with others. Share your love. Share your humor. Share your concern. Share your humanity. And in this way, we will truly have a fully productive, spiritual, healthy, and wonderful life. Thank you.